For latest updates and short audio clips, follow us on Instagram, Reading the Author.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast Reading the Author, a unique show where we read authors' mind and not their book. Meanwhile, I truly believe and pray that you and your families are completely safe and healthy as well. Guys, today we have Rekha Nair with us, and she is the author of The Doer. Thank you so much, ma'am, for coming on our show. I'm truly grateful कि आप हमारे शो पर आए.
Thank you, Gaurav. I'm really glad I'm here.
Pleasure, ma'am. So, ma'am, before we get into the podcast and know much more about your book, about your upcoming projects and everything, I would request you to please introduce yourself so that our listeners can know much more about you, and do share how you started this writing journey as well.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Rekha Nair, and I'm here to mainly talk about my book, The Doer, today, which got published this year. This book is my journey to myself. It's an introspection that's jotted down in a book. I share about my experiences and what life has taught me through its challenges. I have been raised in India, but I did some of my schooling abroad, and that's when life got a little messy, and that's when I started my spiritual journey.
Okay. So, ma'am, can you elaborate how and what prompted you to embark on this journey to the self? How does it happen?
So I think the seeds were already in me growing up, but they weren't as strong. And then as life started getting challenging in my early 20s, which I think happens to a lot of us, and this was a prolonged phase of challenges, which is when one just gives up, the control and then starts introspecting to see what's actually happening. And, it's a lot of those things that happened in that phase, which I started writing down. I've always journaled growing up, but then I think my spiritual journaling started, a little bit towards the end of that phase when things were clearing out and I wanted to, note whatever was happening around me, especially spiritually.
Okay. So, ma'am, after listening to this podcast, many people will just love to explore about this book. They must be interested in buying it. So, talking from a new reader's perspective, what they can expect from this book, can you share some insights with us?
Sure. So this book is, it's a lot of what happens in our day-to-day lives. I myself have gone through phases which I'm sure a lot of us go through. There's nothing unique that happened to me. It's just stuff that happens to all of us, but it's just my own discovery of what helped me recover and not just recover, but what helped me progress in my life from what happened. It's a lot of those experiences and a lot of those bullet points that I've tried to consolidate into a book. So if somebody is going through a challenging phase, or somebody is already out of a challenging phase, but they are confused and and not able to see a clarity in whatever has happened to them, or if there's someone who is just born curious, I know a lot of people are born that way. Things may be going pretty okay for them, but they're just curious about life, and how things work, and what is spirituality. So this is a very it's a perspective book. I wouldn't say this is the it's the law and this is how it is. I'm not saying any of that. It's a subjective experience of a person, trying to find the meaning to the experiences that happen in life. So if anybody is curious about that, interested in those experiences and what you learn from them, then they might find this book interesting.
Okay. So, ma'am, as you said that it is a kind of narrative book, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when it comes to this particular name, The Doer, what does it symbolize in your narrative?
So the doer, it's actually I'm talking about the cosmic force. I believe that everything that's happening in and around me, there is an ultimate force that's operating which is not very obvious in the beginning, but as you start introspecting more and more, this is my understanding, and and I felt like there was an underlying force that operates, and I wanted to call the force the doer, because I feel it's that ultimate force that's doing everything, and we are just instruments that gets worked on.
Okay. But like as you said that there's some kind of force that is doing everything. Yeah. So how does that reflects, or how do you define the role of doer in everyday life? As a teacher or as an influencer, how does that happen?
So the way I see it is that when you start progressing, or when you come out of difficult phases, and when you start retrospecting about the things that happened, sometimes you come to a point where you start seeing a purpose in everything that's happening to you, and my question was, who's bringing that purpose in my life? Like, how I came to a point where I felt like, okay, this happened to me because ultimately I was supposed to get here, and I'm sure a lot of people share those experiences where you wanted to do something else in life, but it didn't go that way, but it led to something else which helped you to be where you are. So it seems like there's an orchestration that's happening in your life, and and I feel like it happens in every single thing. It's not just a big event that happens in your life that's determined by a force, but I feel like every single thing, every minute, every second, the way your life is going, I feel like it's a part of a bigger orchestration, a bigger planning. So that's why I feel that force, or the force of the doer, operating in every single thing that's happening in my life.
Okay. So you have talked about the concept of letting go as well, right?
Right.
Okay. So like, what does that context, like when it comes to a letting go thing, like how can a person relate to and see the positive side of that in life?
So I feel our biggest suffering, at least for me, the biggest suffering was trying to control your life, right? You have desires, we have aspirations, and a lot of times suffering happens because things don't go the way you want them to go. Everybody wants ultimately to be happy, content, and in bliss, and usually when things happen that way, and you experience these factors, you say that things are going right for you, and when they don't, you say things are not going the right way for you. So there was ultimately a push and pull of something that was within me that was struggling, and the way I saw it was that I was, the analogy that I use a lot of times is a telescope. You use a telescope to see the sky, but if you start mistaking the image you see to be the telescope, instead of seeing that it's the telescope that's just helping you see the life, the telescope itself is not the life. So for me, that was the art of letting go. I felt like I was thinking that my ego, which controls my five senses, which helps me see the creation, I was mistaking that for the creator. You know what I mean? So the moment I understood that, my senses, my ego, all it helps me is to see the beautiful creation of the creator. It helped me understand the art of letting go, and with letting go, I means to lose a sense of control over everything that's happening to you, and rather change your focus, shift your focus to why things are happening to you, what is meant, why is it here in your life at this moment, try to find a purpose and see where it's taking you, or where it has brought you so far. That's also a good way to see it. I think it brings a lot of peace and content. At least that's what it did to me. So I'm hoping it'll do the same for others as well.
Okay, ma'am. But ma'am, like, I wanted to ask a question, out of curiosity. Like many times
Yes.
we keep on trying and trying and trying, like, but we don't see the thing happening in our life. Like, कुछ चीजें होती हैं जो हमारे कंट्रोल से बहुत बाहर होती हैं. We just
हाँ जी.
need to let go about those things. So how can one
Yes.
distinguish upon between the things like what are within our control and what is not?
So I ultimately believe that nothing is in the control of my ego, So I think the first step is to understand what is ego and what is not ego. I think the moment you understand the difference between the ego and the non-ego part of yourself, it'll be easier to understand what is in control and what is not in control. To explain a little further, like I said, I don't believe that I have a control over anything that happens in my life. I believe that everything that's happening to me is for a reason that's higher than what I'm thinking. Like, I don't know if people who have read the book would know that there is a sentence in the book that says, I think the purpose for me was set even before I was born, because there are two big truths in my life. One is birth and the other is death, and neither of them are in my control, So that means I was here because there was a destiny that I was supposed to be here, I feel when you surrender to that force, that purpose, things get a lot easier for you, because then you understand that you are here for a higher cause than a much obvious cause that's in front of you, So instead of seeing failures and success, I guess it's easier if you start looking at as a journey and where you're at right now, what brought you here, what failure helped you come here, what success helped you come here, then it won't be so much about success and failure. It will be about where is all this leading you to. So every time I feel like my radar comes back to the purpose, what is the purpose? What is the bigger purpose for you here?
Okay. So ma'am, now let's move towards the topic of spirituality a little bit. What I have personally feel that people have, complicated it a lot. Like, if we talk about spirituality, people just think about ki ghanto baith ke, they have to do meditation, puja and all of those things. So how can people simplify their approach to spirituality and, avoid complications and, get rid of those do's and don'ts? What's your take on this?
So, I also believe that everybody's journey is very unique and individual, For some person, it's all different stages of a path. That's what I believe in. And based on where you're at, there might be different tools that work for you to stay spiritual. And, and for me, spirituality is ultimately trying to be one with the force that's brought you here. It's the oneness, or being one with the universal force, God, whatever you want to call it. So it's or like falling back to your center, which is always peaceful and content. So for me, that process of this coming back to your center or becoming one with the cosmic force or God, that's spirituality for me. And for every person, I think the way to attain it is different based on where they are at in their lives. If somebody has progressed really far and then they have been successful enough to understand the ego and how to not be affected by the ego, probably they'll be more successful in understanding the ritualistic path of spirituality. For someone who may not be that progress, maybe it may be simpler tools for them. So I guess everybody is different. I don't think there is a universal law or a universal method that everybody can just follow and attain whatever they're looking for. I think having that understanding and acceptance is a big key to staying
That's
consistent with your spirituality. Yes.
Okay. So ma'am, as you said in the last question, that the two utter truths are the birth and the death as well, right? And whatever जो हमारा यहाँ पे purpose है, that is already decided as well, right?
Yes.
So like, how do you reconcile the belief that there is already a plan in place for each individual? Like, how does that happen?
I mean, if I can only speak for myself, and I can just look for people who resonate with this thought. Like, I can't impose my beliefs on others, so I can just speak for myself. Like, every time when I look at my life, whenever I see a desire, if I just convert my life into different sections and I take a small section of my life and if I try to examine it, It'll have desires, it'll have intentions, it'll have things happening. And a lot of times when you try going back to the root cause of why things happen in the first place, it always reached a point for me where I knew that it wasn't me who decided to do this in the first place. You know what I mean? And there is an example in the book which talks about I always wanted to go abroad, growing up. And then I tried to examine why did I always wanted to go to the West, and it was a lot of influences that I had around me. And, there were certain desires that came in me to live a certain way as a woman and, to be free and, but then when I examined further, I wanted to see why did these desires come in me in the first place? So when I extrapolated it back further, there came a point where I don't know why, it just happened in me. It happened because I was born in a certain place, in a certain circumstances, which I didn't have control over, So ultimately it came to a point where the trigger was something that was not in my control. Yeah. But everything were more obvious, but so that's the reason why.
Okay. So my next question to this podcast is when it comes to talking about this particular book, The Doer, what are those couple of lessons or, that couple of 2 lines or 2 things that you want readers to take definitely from this book? कि नहीं, इस बुक से ये 2 चीजें तो आपको लेके जानी ही चाहिए. What, from a author's perspective?
I think one is to understand what gives you contentment. I think that's huge because we all are striving for it, and the moment and it's not very obvious in the beginning. It's not as, surfaced as you think. Sometimes you may have to really go deeper and deeper to really understand what gives you contentment, and this is not one general contentment I'm talking about. Every situation that you're in, and if you find yourself struggling, the starting point for recovering is, I think, trying to dig deeper to see what's actually going to give you contentment. I think that that search is always something that can help you progress and recover from what's going on. So and I've explained in the book a little bit about how to do that, how to deconstruct the situation and see what is ultimately in the surface that you are striving for, So I would, if that helps anybody, who's going through a struggle, or somebody is just curious about, what tool to use, I think that would be a great tool to take away if that helps you. And another one is definitely the art of letting go, because I think not letting go of things is a baggage that you don't want to carry, with you. But again, having an understanding that things happen at the right time for you, and not to stress too much about things, about, you may be reading the book and, somebody may be reading different spiritual books, listening to spiritual gurus and, and maybe thinking, why am I not able to attain, nirvana, like right here, right now. So just understanding that everything has a time, and when you are in that time, that's the best time for you, because you have learned all these lessons, and you'll value where you've reached once you go through all the lessons, So I guess these few things would be a good takeaway from the book.
Okay, ma'am. So ma'am, as in the beginning of this podcast, we have talked about from the perspective of a new reader. Now talking about the perspective of people who have already read a book, like the readers who have already completed this book, what they can expect from you as of now? Like, is there anything in the pipeline you want to experiment a bit on some other genres too, or you want to, stick to these only? Like, what's upcoming?
So, I had never thought I would be an author at any point in my life, so I've never taken this in that perspective. This book, like I said, it really happened without my planning, it's just that at some point I wanted to consolidate my journaling, my spiritual journaling, and it just turned into a book. So I believe that there is, like I said, I'm a big believer of destiny, but I do know my second book is if it's meant to happen, it'll happen once I've had enough experiences and, I've sort of come out of something. I usually believe that I would like to tell a story that has something to take away from, rather than just talking about an experience. And
Okay.
I would like to share with people what I've learned, and from an experience. So hopefully, let's see, hopefully in the coming 4 5 years, there might be something coming up.
Definitely, ma'am. So, ma'am, now let's get back to the topic of, interpretation as well, because, almost we have
Okay.
touched everything related to this book. And I definitely feel that in this book, you have talked about interpretations as well, right?
Right.
Okay. So, in what ways do our interpretations change as we progress in life? Like, do they change, or do they just stick to remain the basics as well?
I think they largely change as you progress in life. At least that's what I felt when I look back at my life. Like I said, we all want things to go right for us. And when you don't get happiness and contentment from something that's happening in your life, you see it as wrong. Things are not going the right way for me. This is the wrong time for me. We always say things like that. But and I also believe that no phase is constant. We always have good and bad phases in our life. And as you progress and you enter the next phase of your life, which usually might be much better than what you were going through, if you try to connect the dots, a lot of times you will see that there is some connection between what was going wrong in your life and how it has helped you to be where you are right now, in whatever success you have at this moment. So then when you look at things from this standpoint, when you're successful and when you're having a good life, and you see how that wrong that was happening in your life has helped you to be where you are, your perspective changes for the wrong, and it doesn't seem that wrong anymore. And you kind of have a gratitude that I'm glad it happened to me so that I'm here.
That's why I'm here. Yeah.
Yes. So that's what I meant by interpretations of rights and wrong. It's just a matter of your progress and perception.
So basically, they all get influenced by life events much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I'm like, what have been the most significant revelations for you through this journey of unveiling?
I'm sorry, what was the last line?
Journey of unveiling. Sorry.
Unveiling. Okay. So I guess, like I said, when you're growing up, you have this obvious notion of being in control. Like at least I had, this notion that I need to use my five senses to turn life the way I want it to go. Like, I have to say certain things, I have to do certain things, I have to think a certain way. And, it always seemed like a struggle for me. So I think the biggest unveiling that happened to me as things started progressing and as I started coming out of a lot of challenges and reached a much better place for myself was that, I just had to let go of the sense of control, so that unveiling of what is in control and what is not was the biggest lesson for me. And, and I'm so grateful for that lesson because it's been a constant tool that I use even now in my day-to-day life whenever things get challenging. And it always helps me come out of a difficult phase.
So, ma'am, probably my last question to this podcast will be like, after listening to this podcast, many people will just start to write, or they must be holding their first draft in their laptop, in their diary. So, what would be your advice for those upcoming authors?
Well, first, it's I don't feel qualified enough to give an advice on a subject like that. But the thing that has worked for me was trying to be as authentic as possible, and I tried to keep things very disciplined. Like, when I was writing, I made sure I picked a time of the day and I make sure I was, much more calm, and, I let thoughts come to me instead of trying to struggle and find, try to control the thoughts. You know what I mean? And all these things are because I wasn't necessarily thinking I'm the one writing. I just felt like an instrument, and I felt like these thoughts were coming to me, and all I had to do was write them down or type them on my laptop, So this was my process, and this is how things work for me. But people who are professional writers, they may have more tools than me that might be more helpful when it comes to making, writing as a profession. So, but this is my little piece of advice. Just try to be as authentic as you can, and usually it takes you a long way.
Okay, so that's all for today, guys. I hope you must have enjoyed this lovely and inspiring conversation with Rekha Nair, ma'am. And if you do, then do follow our podcast, Reading the Author, available on all the leading podcast platforms. Don't forget to buy and read the book. आप just Amazon पे जाएं, वहाँ पे search करें रेखा नायर. Either you can search The Doer. You will find the book. Buy it, read it, and share with your friends and family as well. Thank you so much, ma'am, for coming on our show. It was my honor to be able to host you today.
Thank you, Gaurav, and thank you for these very thought-provoking questions. I'm really glad I was here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Pleasure.